Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my honest book review of this book, which is Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. I feel like every YouTuber and mum person that I watch has recommended this book at some point or another, so it was high on my list of things to watch, and I thought I would review it for you in case you've seen other people recommend it and you want to see if you would like to buy it. So if you haven't been here before, then my name is Abigail and I make videos based around intentional Christian parenting. So yes, let's crack on into it. So who is this book for? This book is aimed primarily at parents, but also at teachers and carers and anyone else who's got a big say in the upbringing of a child. So I feel like I'm the target market essentially for this book. So I feel like I've got a really good, I'll be able to tell you really well if this is a worthwhile book to get. But it is aimed at a broader spectrum of people as well. The premise of the book is that it aims to show us different ways to discipline our children that don't involve using punishments and rewards. It is intentionally controversial as it aims to challenge a lot of what the other parenting books would say. I feel like the idea behind this book should fit in nicely with Montessori principles, with gentle parenting, with respectful parenting, with all these different kind of things. So if that's kind of up your street, then I think this book might potentially be good, but let's crack on a bit deeper into it and see if it's a good book or not. So there are 10 chapters in this book. The first 6 are all about the measures that people generally use to punish or reward their children and why these are damaging to our children. And the last 4 chapters of the book are him talking about his principles and the way you work out the unconditional parenting, which is the title of this book. So personally, I'd have preferred a slightly different split. I'd have preferred more on what he's talking about, which is unconditional parenting, and slightly less on him just saying why our normal parenting style is bad. But I get why he's done it, because he feels it's quite hard to push against this kind of type of parenting. I think this book was published in about 2006, so since then I think we've progressed a bit more, so we need to push back less against why punishments and things are bad, whereas in 2006 maybe you needed to push that a bit more because more people thought that this way of living was good. But now, with the rise of gentle parenting, respectful parenting, and so many parents taking this on, we maybe don't need as much of this. One thing that I really do like is that he uses research papers to back up his point of view. I really dislike people that just have a view and they don't have any kind of evidence to back it up, whereas in this he does a lot of kind of little reference points, and you can go and look up the references and in the appendix and see all the different places that he cites these from, so you can go and look at the original source if you want to as well. Okay, I'm just going to go through a few of the key concepts from chapters 1 to 6 that he kind of brings out in the book, and just to kind of give you an overall flavour of the things that he is against. So Alfie Kohn in this book talks about conditional parenting, which is the opposite of what he advocates, which is unconditional parenting. And he equates with conditional parenting with showing conditional love, which he feels like you're showing conditional love if you use a system of punishments and rewards. He says that it's not so important that we know that we love our children, it's more important that our kids get that message and that they know they are loved. And he kind of sums up by saying conditional is a doing to our kids and unconditional is a working with our kids. So I know a lot of people at the moment would agree that physical punishments like hitting our children shouldn't be done, but he's also against things like timeouts, which I know lots and lots of parents use. He thinks that's like a form of love withdrawal, and he's very against praise, so basically saying good job to your child. He's against that, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail later on, but that's kind of something that you might think, oh, I didn't know, like saying good job to my child could be potentially damaging. And one of the reasons he thinks that rewards don't work is because the child is doing something for the wrong reason. They are sharing with their friend so they get their good job and well done from their parent, rather than because they want to actually share with their friend. And he kind of equates this to basically children feel like they are loved only under certain conditions if we use punishments and rewards. They feel like they're only loved if they behave in a certain way. So if they do this certain thing, they feel like they're only loved then. That's Alfie's kind of premise. He talks a bit about parents becoming very controlling. He talks about power play, and essentially he kind of brings up the idea that we want our kids to be obedient, right? But if we think about what we want our kids to be like in the future is obedient top of our list of things that we want our kids to be as adults? Would we say, so my child's called Samuel. When Samuel is growing up, what would I like him to be like? So I might say things like, I want him to be loving, I want him to be kind, I want him to be respectful. But would obedient be top of that list? That's kind of something he asks us to question. And if obedience is not top of that list, then why do we act in a day-to-day way as if that's the most important thing with our kids now? He talks a lot about helping children be more in control of their own life, which is a very Montessori concept. So people who are into Montessori, that'll kind of resonate with you a bit, that kind of section where it talks about giving the child choice and helping them to have more control over their life. And then in chapter 4, he talks specifically about punishments, about why he thinks they don't work and why he thinks they're specifically very damaging. He goes into a bunch of reasons why he thinks punishments fail. I'll just read a couple of them out to you so you get an idea. It makes people mad, it models the use of power, it eventually loses its effectiveness, it erodes our relationships with our kids, it distracts kids from the important issues. So essentially, if we send them for a timeout, do they really sit there and think, oh, I did such a bad thing, I wonder how I could do better next time? Or are they thinking, how can I avoid that punishment next time? So he goes through a lot of different ways that he thinks that punishments are not good, that they're damaging, and that they are really eroding our relationships with our kids and being counterproductive. So when thinking about punishments, he focuses a lot on timeouts, I think because hitting isn't so much done nowadays, but timeouts are done a lot, and a lot of parenting books advocate timeouts and say they're a really great thing to use. But he is very against that. He uses quite strong language, like he calls it forcible isolation, and he is very against that. You'll have to read the book to kind of go into all the ins and outs of why he's against that, but I did find it very, very interesting. The next chapter is all about being pushed to succeed and how having a grade system, so being graded at school, actually hinders learning and a desire to learn, and like dampens it down instead of helping it. I really, really like this chapter. I found it really interesting because I myself have felt myself hindered, like my desire to learn has been like dampened down the more I get graded and stuff. And it is true, the more you grade a child on something, the more they'll just work for the grade and the less they'll actually care what they're learning. I find this really interesting, specifically because I'm potentially thinking about homeschooling in the future. It's kind of something at the back of my mind. It's not coming up super soon, but it's something in the back of my mind that I'm thinking, do I want to homeschool? And this would be a case towards that, because you could just not have grades in your homeschooling system, and I probably wouldn't. So that's something really interesting to think about, and something that I found really, really helpful. So one of the things he goes through, he says that grades lead students to pick the easiest possible assignment when giving a choice. So if they know they're graded on something, they're going to pick the easiest thing because they're going to get the better grade, whereas they're not going to take risks, they're not going to learn as easily. It also goes into sports, which isn't as big here, but I know competitive sports in America are huge, and he thinks that competitive sports are really negative, and the effects are very damaging to the child. So you can go and read about that bit if you're in America or somewhere that competitive sports are really pushed. Okay, we're now at chapter 6, and honestly by this point I'm just like, get on with what you want to say. Enough of the kind of negative, like this is what we're not doing. But chapter 6 starts by going into society and the negative things in it and how it drives us to treat our kids in this way. So he does have half a page where he talks about religion, and I was interested to see what he would say as a Christian myself, and he does specifically name Christianity in this little section. And he basically says that Christianity and religion in general helps us to treat our kids with conditional love. So with what he would see as negative things, he sees religion having a very negative impact on our kids. And honestly, I would just say to ignore Kohn at this point, because he's just displaying his ignorance in the subject. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's devoted a little half-page section, so he's clearly not got a huge amount of knowledge in this area, and I would just say he's kind of embarrassing himself a little bit. So if you're a Christian, read it, but be aware that he doesn't know what he's talking about, essentially. It's very clear to me that he doesn't understand the Bible properly, even if he's even read it, which I kind of doubt. It feels a bit like he's had an experience in the past with religion in general that's been negative, and he's just drawn on that experience, and he doesn't actually, and he's also picked, he does quote a couple of passages in the Bible, and he's like just extracted them from the context. So yeah, he's not given religion a fair trial, and he's like devoted a little half-page section to it, and I would just say, just ignore it. Okay, chapter 7, he finally gets to his point. So this is where he goes into the principles of unconditional parenting. He lays out his points and he gives a couple of examples in there as well. I did find this chapter very helpful. I would have liked more of this. I would have liked more meat in my book. If you've watched my book reviews before, you know that I like a meaty book. And I would say that this is not a particularly meaty book, especially because the appendices take up quite a lot of the book. And then when you take away the first section as well, there's not a lot where he just talks about his principles of unconditional parenting. And I think he could have made that a lot more meaty. I really liked in chapter 8, he's got this little table here. I don't know if you can see that. So you can screenshot that if you like. But it essentially has a little table of saying, instead of this, do this. So this one's specifically about praise and giving examples of what you can do as an alternative to praise. So an example of this, and one that I would use quite a lot, is when you say, oh, good drawing, I like those pictures. Instead of doing that, you can describe what you see rather than evaluating or judging it. So you can say, hey, there's something new on the feet of those people you just drew. They've got toes. So instead of saying, when your child shows you a picture, oh, that's lovely, you could say, oh, I like the amount of red you've used in the picture, or not even I like, I guess. Just say, you've used a lot of red in the picture. And that's a way of praising your child without directly praising them. I think that's like an alternative to praise that he gives. So I find that really helpful. I would have liked a lot more of things like that in the book. I'd have liked a lot more tables and maybe little diagrams and stuff that makes it seem like a lot more digestible. By the way, I'm sorry if I sound super like hoarse, or I have to keep like cutting this because I keep coughing, and if I've cut the footage weirdly, I'm sorry. I've got a cold and I'm like struggling a little bit. He does also talk about if you have your child in school already, because you don't have the choice of taking them out of school, and he kind of says essentially that you should give your child's teacher advice on how they could improve. Which to me, I would say it's naive, but he does seem to go around the world and talk about this stuff, so he doesn't seem naive, but it does seem a little bit, because I don't think teachers are going to be happy with us giving them feedback, at least not where I live. I'm not going to have a teacher probably that's happy with me giving them feedback on how they should improve their teaching. So I think that's like a little bit like, it's not going to happen. And then he goes into a little bit more detail about how our kids should have choice, and he does have a little bit in this chapter where you essentially can, if you can see that, you can fill out, he gives you questions and you fill it out, and it's like a little bit interactive if you like that kind of thing. And finally he talks about looking at things from the child's perspective. I've heard this advice before. I think it's great advice. I really like this idea that you should always be thinking about how your child views these things. So for example, if you have to leave the park all of a sudden, then your child's going to get upset because they were doing something really fun and then they've got to go home and it's really boring. So if you think about something that you are doing is really fun, like watching your favourite TV show or something, then, and you had to suddenly get that cut off, you can kind of understand how you would feel. So I really like this advice. I like this chapter, and it's all about seeing things from your child's perspective. I would recommend this book if you are into Montessori, if you're into gentle parenting, respectful parenting. It comes under all those kind of categories. It fits in very well with that style of parenting. And I would also say pick this book up if you have never thought there was any other option but to reward your child with star charts or to give them a timeout. If you've never thought there's any other options to that and you want your thinking challenged, then this is definitely a book to pick up. I picked this book up and I went back through it and I wrote down everything that I thought I could apply personally to my life, and I got a good, like, decent A4 size page. So I did find really practical, useful things from it. It is still slightly controversial over 10 years on since it's been written. There is a lot more move towards this way of parenting, but it is slightly controversial. I know lots of parents in my area would just not even think of it this way. So I would say it's definitely worth reading to get a different perspective. I would say that if you're a Christian, Alfie Kohn's view of humanity as a whole is completely different to a Christian's view. So we would say that all people are sinful and that we've to be brought back to God. And Alfie Kohn thinks that ultimately all people are good inside, so he's a humanist essentially, which is very different from what a Christian would be. But at the same time, you can still get a lot from this book, even if you don't have the same fundamental underlying beliefs as Alfie Kohn. yes, so I enjoyed this book overall. I would recommend go and check it out. It's not super expensive on Amazon. I'll link it down below if you want to check it out. It definitely challenged a lot of my opinions on parenting. I'm not going to implement everything, but there's definitely a good few points that I am going to implement in my parenting, so I would recommend checking it out. I have done other book reviews. I'm going to link a couple here. I've reviewed the Montessori Toddler, which I would recommend, especially if you are into this kind of book. Recommend the Montessori Toddler, and that's all about Montessori style of parenting. So yes, I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.